Welcome, everyone, to the Inclusion Podcast. I'm Dr. Julie Costin.
And I'm Dr. Christy Preddy-Franzak. We're so glad you're here as we explore all things inclusion.
So whether you're a school leader, an educator, a parent, or simply passionate about inclusion, this podcast is for you.
In each episode, we go beyond the usual conversations, diving into what truly makes inclusive education work.
Together, let's make a difference, one conversation at a time. Here we go. Episode 42. Go ahead and do a drum roll on your desk. Today's about differentiation and how to talk about it and how to think about it. Because most of us went to school with everybody learning a single lesson unless they struggled, and then they would be in a different group unless they excelled, and then they would be in a different group. So we used to do things called ability grouping.
Yeah, tracking, grouping. Used to? What do you mean used to?
Christy, I like to talk about it as if it's past, okay?
Oh,
so
like
just
way back in the 70s?
Yeah, let's just please keep it that way. But of course, we know that people ability group now. And we're talking about those innovative educators that have moved way beyond ability grouping and are differentiating in the classroom all the time. And when they're differentiating, it means there are often many choices for kids to engage with as opposed to kids are grouped by deficit.
And I think, Julie, this is also an episode for people on TikTok who don't think differentiation's good.
Oh, Christy, yeah.
I don't want to pick a fight with anybody, but if I see one more thing about it, now I'm okay when people talk about the lack of validity around learning styles. However, each of us knows that we have preferences about how we learn, which is going to come into our multiple means of representation, engagement, and expression. So I'm just saying, Julie, this is also for anyone who's ever heard that differentiation doesn't work.
Okay.
Okay. Is that okay for me to say?
Yeah. And it's also okay for teachers who say it's not fair to differentiate.
Yeah.
So I'm going to use this and I'm going to explain it in a way that I did when I taught fourth grade, because I found it to be one of the most valuable things we did at the beginning of the year. And sometimes we'd have to bring it back up again.
Is this with your students?
Yes.
Okay. So like this is when kids are sort of going, hey, it's not fair that he or she or they get to, or whatever it might be.
Right.
You're trying to differentiate. You're trying to have different processes, products, interests. And somebody's like, hey, okay.
Why does so-and-so get? So
why does so-and-so get? Okay.
Yeah. And so all of us who differentiate can probably remember a time or an experience when someone has said, that's not fair. And it's really hard to address in the moment. So what I like to do is do this in a really systematic way at the beginning of the year to get everybody set up so that they expect and understand how I think about learners and how we're going to operate in this particular classroom.
And Julie, have you ever done this with families?
I've never done it with families, but I've done it with educators most often.
Yeah. I'm going to think a little bit about that. So you're going to tell a story about how you did it with students. We're also going to talk about how you can do this with the download in your own staff development or with your co-teachers or with your, grade level planning folks. And again, the download for this one is we explain what the activity is inclusiveschooling.com/download 42. But I also want to think about using it with families who may think something isn't fair in terms of how you're teaching. So keep going.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay, great. So what I do is I ask questions at the beginning and I say things like, is it fair that on the spelling test, some people have 5 words, some people have 10 words, and some people have 15 words? Is that fair? And kids will say no. And then I'll say, is it fair for homework? Sometimes kids get this. Sometimes kids have to read a chapter. Sometimes kids have to read a paragraph. And sometimes kids have to draw a picture. Is that fair? And right away, kids say no, right? So I start out by preparing them for their initial constructs around fairness, okay?
And you're using examples of how you're going to go about teaching, because that's how you would do a test or that's how you would do homework.
That's right. Right.
Okay.
And so I use lots of different examples. And Kids overall will say, no, that's not fair. It's not fair if somebody doesn't get homework and somebody gets blah, 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 those kind of things. So then I say, okay, friends, I want you to pretend that I want you to get into groups of 4. So they get into groups of 3 or 4, and they pretend that they are a nurse in an emergency room. And this is why you're going to want the download, is because I have this all printed out for you. But it's really for you to talk through these emergencies and talk through these people that are coming into the emergency room and rank order them 1 to 12. So, for example, there's a baby with a temperature of 104 on there. There's a person with a bad nosebleed. There's a child with a broken leg. There's a woman in labor. Okay. And it's so adorable to watch fourth graders talk about like what's more important and which one are we going to rank order and who's first and who's last. And I say, this is an emergency. So you have 2 minutes to decide. Like, that's it. So when the timer goes off, you're done.
Oh, Julie, I don't know if you told them that they have to decide what? The ranking. Just say that one more time.
Oh, sure. They have to rank order them.
Rank order them, like
Read.
who's going to get served first or seen first?
Yep. Rank order them to mean the first one is the most critical and needs to be taken care of first. And the 12th one is the least critical and needs and can wait. They can just.
Okay. So all 12 of these people came to the emergency room all at once, and you're the nurse on call, and you're like, oh, I got to triage this. Who are we going to see first? Who are we going to see second? All the way to like, sorry, friend, I don't know why you're even in the ER. You're 12.
Yeah. Many of us have been in an ER and been.
Yeah. Many of us are like, I was 12.
I was 12th on the list and it took 4 days for me to be seen. Right. So exactly. So they spend time engaging, discussing. They get very serious about this test because, well, it's life and death. Then I say to them, okay, let's publicly kind of admit to your rank order. So I say, how many people put a 1 or a 2 by these specific ones? So I read them all down and people raise their hands confidently, like
for sure we should help. Which one? Which one came up a lot?
Person having a stroke is usually one that they go with first. And the person having a heart attack is also a big number 1 getter, right? And then I say, okay, wait. I am in charge of the emergency room. And I need to be fair to all of these people. And so here's my plan. And I think it's a good one because if you're not fair to people in an emergency room, you can get sued. There's litigation. There's all sorts of problems and complications. And the kids are like, okay. And then I say, here's my plan. Everybody gets 2 shocks with the defibrillator. And right there, fourth graders are like, you can't shock that baby with the temperature with the defibrillator. So people start to get nervous. And I say, no, yes, I can. 2 shocks with the defibrillator. Everybody gets a tourniquet on their arm. Everybody on this list I'm going to give them 2 aspirin. I'm going to tell them all to lay down and put their feet up. And everybody gets an epidural. Okay.
Just for good measure, everybody gets an epidural.
Everybody gets an epidural. And first they say, what's an epidural? And then I explain how great they are because I had 2 children and it was really nice. And I explain it and they're like, okay, great. So this is where I say discuss. And the kids are like, that's not fair. It's not okay. That baby doesn't need 2 shocks of the paddles. The person with the broken leg doesn't need a tourniquet on their arm. That person doesn't need aspirin. That person certainly doesn't need an epidural.
Well, Julia, I would say they probably came up with 9. They don't need it. It's actually going to cause more harm.
Yeah. And I said, well, it doesn't matter. We've got to be fair, though. And so we get into these beautiful discussions about what fairness means. And some bright, shiny star in the classroom raises their hand at some point and says, well, in this case, fair means everyone gets what they need. And you say, Eureka, in this classroom, fair means everyone gets what they need. And my job as head of this classroom, just like being head of this emergency room, is that I have to give everybody different things at different times based on their needs in the moment. So you should not expect everybody to get the same thing. You should not expect things to look cookie cutter. Everybody's doing the same thing at the same time. But what you should expect is for me, as the head of this emergency room or the head of this classroom, to be providing all sorts of options for people that work for them right where they are, right when they need it and right today. And if at any time you are given something that doesn't feel fair to you at the moment, you let me know. But it's not a place or a space to talk about or think about what other people are getting because they're getting what they need at the time when they need it. Now, this discussion goes very far in fourth grade because people understand, oh, right. And all I do is I check our definition of fair, which I've written above the chalkboard. Not written, but I get a little poster that says fair means everyone gets what they need. And that is really useful when people say it's not fair. Why is so and so getting blank or blank? Now, Christy, I told you that I use this often with educators because educators need this activity. They need to do it with their kids. Whether you teach middle school, college, high school, or kindergarten. Now, if you teach kindergarten, I've suggested that people modify the things that I've said here. Like someone has a bad cough, someone has a boo-boo on their knee, and someone you can change it up. But kindergartners understand this concept. I've done it with kindergartners before. All that to be said, sometimes your colleagues need to understand this too. So if you're a special ed teacher and people are wondering why are we allowing people to get different grades on different things based on disability, it's like fair means people get what they need, and this is what this kid needs, and so this is what's fair for us.
Well, I think it does a couple of things for us, Julie. I'm just taking some notes as I was thinking about the story. So, we talk a lot about equity
Mhm.
and equal and all these words that get confusing. I think this is a nice way to just sort of simplify
Mhm. Mhm.
what we mean by equity.
Right.
And I think that because our vernacular is to say, but it's not fair. Miss Julie, it's not fair. Or I would just say in the US in general, there's a lot of it's not fair because we're feeling that something is being taken away from us or something that I'm entitled to.
Mhm.
So I love that you said, come to me if you feel like something's not fair to you, but not in comparison to what others are getting. So, just because the United States has more money than other countries, and so we have to spend more to work on, you know, climate change doesn't make it unfair. It's like we have to have those conversations even as a community to say, oh, right, it is fair for us to do more because we have more resources or we contribute more to the problem in the first place. Anyway, that said, so I love that it's not comparing to others, but it is an opportunity to think, is this working for me? I thought about it when you said older students in a preventative way. I could hear a student saying, it's not fair that I have an F in this class. It's not
Mhm.
fair that you gave me all zeros for the homework I didn't do. Like I can hear people saying like kids are going to think things aren't fair, but it's a natural consequence. But I think that what happened was we gave homework that was cookie cutter, or we gave an assignment that was cookie cutter. Somebody struggled with that for some reason, ended up not doing it, not doing well on it, not being motivated, like all the things we talk about in episode 41. Whereas if I could have differentiated to begin with, the student might have done the homework or might have had greater success, and we wouldn't be grappling over, did they earn the zero that they got? Do you know what I mean by that?
I do, yeah, and that comes from differentiating the homework to begin with, like you're saying. So, a lot of times I would have homework that was choice and challenge, meaning, "Hey, so today my goal is for you to read several, books this year, and for today your choice is do you have the bandwidth today to read for 5 minutes, 15, or 30? Your choice, but what works for you today?" And what I loved is kids would say, "Oh my gosh, my parents are out of town or whatever, so I have a lot of time. I'm gonna read for next week." Great. And some kids are saying, "Today's a 5 minute if I'm lucky." And those kind of kids, when they would say stuff like that to me, that gave me a lot of information. And I would say, it's also okay to skip the homework today and we can do more tomorrow if that will help you. And it was like, let's have real discussion with kids about what they need in the moment, as opposed to all kids have all this time and all this support to be able to do anything they want.
And I feel like that's the heart of what you were saying about doing this activity with our colleagues. Let's say we're a middle school team and we're thinking about now that we've become more inclusive, how do we deal with parents, students, everybody going, this isn't fair, this isn't fair. I think it's this conversation, like it's going to change. Differentiation is going to change the story. So we don't have to keep worrying about people are going to come with these problems because we're going to solve so many of the problems around being uninterested. I'm using air quotes, unmotivated, not turning it in, unprepared, all those negative things that we often think about. I think so many of those go away with differentiation. And so the fairness does so much for us up front that I bet it will come up less, is what I'm trying to say.
Oh, yeah. When people start to understand this is your way of being and doing things, people will understand that this makes sense to them and they don't expect equity equal means fair means equal. They expect fair means people getting what they need
When they need it,
when they
which
need it
changes, right?
on
It's
this
not
day.
always. It's not like I always need to pick the easier route or the lesser route. Some days I'm ready for the challenge. So Julie, let's talk a little bit about the handout as we close up. We already mentioned that the handout or the download for this episode gives you the activity so that people can adapt it or reuse it with their kids, colleagues, and so forth. And so that's at inclusiveschooling.com/download 42. What else is in that handout?
Yeah, so we just have a bonus that is called 21 Ways to Talk with Students About Differentiation. So this fairness activity might have really resonated with you and you love it. In fact, I love this and I found it to be so powerful. But there are 21 other ways to think about or talk about differentiation with students that might resonate more with you. And you can definitely create something else using some of the other ones. So I'll just take one favorite one. Let's just say, yeah, learning is like climbing a mountain and some of us need different paths, but the goal is for all of us to reach the top. So you might love that analogy. Like, hey, friends, we're all getting to the top. We're going to get there in different ways. And we're going to need different tools to get there. So that's an analogy that you could play with and really think about how to make that come alive in your classroom if the fairness one doesn't work for you. But for us, it's awesome. And for you, you can change anything about it. So we're just really excited to have new conversations in schools about what we're doing and why we're doing it so that humans are understanding why everybody's getting what they need. Thank you for tuning in, and don't forget to subscribe and catch up on past episodes where we share valuable insights, straight talk, and practical steps to challenge outdated special education practices. You can find every episode with the show notes at inclusiveschooling.com/inclusion-podcast to build more inclusive schools together.